Tonight, retaliation. U.S. airstrikes in Syria after a drone kills an American contractor and injures 5 U.S. service members.
Plus, northern border deal. The U.S. agreement with Canada to turn back migrants making illegal crossings in the north.
And hate crimes in Israel.
This was certainly an act of bigotry or anti-Christian vandalism.
The desecration of a Christian cemetery in Jerusalem has Christians and Jews alarmed.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A dangerous escalation in Syria. Welcome to Faith Nation from our studios in Washington. I'm Caitlin Burke.
And I'm Matt Gelka. We begin with the violent back and forth in Syria. U.S. military airstrikes conducted overnight in the wake of the Iran drone attack that killed a U.S. contractor and injured 5 U.S. service members in eastern Syria.
U.S. retaliatory airstrikes in the region killed 8 Iranians. Today, a new missile strike by Iranian-backed groups targeting a U.S. base in northeast Syria. No damage or injuries have been reported. The Pentagon insisting no groups will strike U.S. troops with impunity.
The U.S. took proportionate and deliberate action intended to limit the risk of escalation and minimize casualties. And Secretary Austin, along with the Department of Defense, offer our thoughts and prayers to the family and colleagues of the American contractor who was killed and with those who were wounded in the attack.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder said U.S. forces will continue their mission in Syria, which centers around defeating ISIS. Joining us now is Behnam Ben-Taleblu, Senior Fellow with Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, thanks for being with us. Kind of a two-part question here to start things off. In light of these recent attacks on American targets in Syria, how well known is the U.S. presence there, and do you see things intensifying into a proxy war with Iran?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Much of the U.S. force presence related to what's left of the counter-ISIS mission in Iraq and Syria is well known by the American public, but perhaps more importantly to your question, well known by one of the many adversaries that the U.S. has in the region, and that's the Islamic Republic of Iran and its broad partner and proxy network, which the regime calls the Axis of Resistance. They actually control the highways and land between the Iraq-Syria border. They ferry men, money, and munitions across this border with great impunity. Militias in Iraq have surged to save the dictatorial and genocidal Assad regime in Syria. And now, for the past few years, they've really turned their fire on what's left of the U.S. force presence in northeast and in southeast Syria, sporadically attacking them with drones and rockets. So I think this is going to get much worse before it gets better. The regime feels quite comfortable with the cycle of violence it has often instigated in Syria. The Biden administration has selectively responded with force, but it's high time we get a better response ratio out of the administration to try to actually deter these attacks and not to merely respond to them in a tit-for-tat fashion.
Behnam, you just talked about some of the weaponry being used there, and you're out with a new report from FDD on Iran's ballistic missile program. How important are the drones to Iran's arsenal?
Well, bless you for bringing up that report. It was a 3-year labor of love analyzing every single ballistic missile in Iran's arsenal. And let's not forget, Iran is home to the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the entire Middle East, more than U.S. ally Israel, more than NATO ally Turkey, and more than U.S. partner Saudi Arabia. So that is quite significant in and of itself. But while ballistic missiles represent the upper tier of Iran's unmanned aerial threat spectrum, cruise missiles and suicide drones that basically function as a poor man's cruise missile are very important, cheaper, low-flying, long-range strike tools in the hands of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its proxies. And they're being seen more and more and more, not just across the heartland of the Middle East, but in Ethiopia and Venezuela, and perhaps most saliently for the audience, used by Putin against civilian targets in Ukraine.
Now, the most recent drone attack on U.S. targets comes just days after new Treasury Department sanctions targeting Iranian drones being used on the battlefield in Ukraine. With the components of many of these drones being Chinese-made, should we also be imposing sanctions on these companies in China that are making them?
Oh, absolutely. We should have a jurisdiction-free sanctions policy, meaning we shouldn't handcuff our own sanctions just because it may end up causing a tussle with another actor like China, whom the U.S. considers to be an adversary anyway. China has long provided much important critical oxygen to Iran's long-range strike capabilities, such as components for the ballistic missile program and the nuclear program even in the 1990s. Precision strike technology much more recently through illicit procurement Iran has gotten through front companies in East Asia and Southeast Asia in particular. And the Islamic Republic continues to go shopping in the heart of Europe through illicit means for its military missile and nuclear programs. So the U.S. should be broadly making sure that it is adding to and enforcing sanctions while beefing up export controls and helping other countries get smart when it comes to how to defeat these illicit procurement rings. Because as much as the regime talks about a robust defense industrial base at home, they are still reliant on a whole host of cheaper commercial-grade products that go into these drones.
Well, Benham, we always appreciate your perspective and your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, closer to home, the U.S. and Canada came to an agreement updating rules at the northern border. The deal comes as President Joe Biden is visiting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The updates will allow both countries to turn away asylum seekers crossing the northern border illegally.
The Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, which the United States and Canada signed last June along with 19 other nations, represents an integrated new approach to the migration challenge, which is real. One that unites humane policies that both secure borders and support people.
The agreement will have asylum seekers to Canada waiting in the United States while their legal process plays out. In exchange, Canada agreed to take on 15,000 Central American migrants over the next year.
As we close out the week, still no movement on a possible indictment and arrest of former President Donald Trump. Trump is warning of violence in the wake of any charges, criticizing the Manhattan District Attorney's investigation into a hush money payment made during the 2016 presidential campaign. Today, Trump posting this picture of himself on his social media platform, Truth Social, with a baseball bat juxtaposed with Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA. In another post, Trump claiming that, quote, no crime has been committed and predicting potential death and destruction, adding that such a false charge could be catastrophic for our country. Last weekend, Trump said his arrest would come this past Tuesday, his campaign reportedly raising over $1.5 million in the days that followed.
So joining us now to talk not all things Trump, but a lot of things Trump is Julia Manchester with The Hill. Julia, thanks for coming on Faith Nation. It's good to see you as always. So we'll start there with the former president, obviously using the threat of an arrest as a fundraising tool. He's also facing 3 other investigations. Does all of the legal trouble play into the Trump's hands politically here?
You know, we'll have to see how far it plays into his hands. I think it definitely does a good job with solidifying his base and really getting his base riled up. Remember, he is holding his first campaign rally of the cycle tomorrow night in Waco, Texas. So we can imagine that this will definitely be on the docket for him to talk about. And it's something that's, like I said, it's going to galvanize a lot of his base to want to donate, to want to talk about this, to sort of, carry on that message of, look, see what they're trying to do to me, see what the political and legal establishment is trying to do to me. So I think he's definitely going to carry that message through. As to whether it attracts more voters outside of that group, though, that's a good question. I would imagine that a lot of voters and polling shows that they're sort of sick and tired of a lot of the political back and forth, especially with these issues surrounding Trump. Trump's baggage may not be the best for swing voters who are looking to decide between a potential matchup between Biden and Trump. But right now, I think this plays well with his base.
Julia, right now, Trump's biggest competition for the Republican nomination seems to be Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis was recently asked if he would consider being Trump's running mate, and he responded that he's more of an executive guy. Now, DeSantis hasn't even officially announced he's running, but do you think that that's a sure bet?
Look, as to whether he's going to announce whether he's running, it seems like he's certainly in that direction. It seems like he's trying to get all that infrastructure in place to announce a presidential run. He's making trips to places like Iowa, for example. So it seems like he's really looking at that. In terms of whether he be President Trump's running mate or not, that remains to be seen. I think there's probably going to be a bruising and bloody primary, but before Trump or whoever the nominee makes the decision as to whether who's going to be their running mate. But look, it seems like Ron DeSantis is kind of gung-ho on being this future face of the Republican Party. And if he were number 2 on a ballot with Trump, I don't think that would be the best for the GOP as a whole. They would essentially have 2 white men again on their ticket, and 2 very conservative men cut from the same cloth. Usually with running mates, you want to try to get someone who somewhat is a contrast to the top of the ticket. So, it's your guess is as good as mine as to where this goes.
All right. Well, we will wait and see. Julia Manchester with The Hill. We appreciate you as always.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, the president's first veto, the progressive agenda applied to your investments and how it could affect your retirement plan.
The GOP's Parents' Bill of Rights is heading to the Senate. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy praising the House-passed legislation aimed at providing parents with additional oversight of their children's education.
Today was a win for every mother, every father, but most importantly, for every student in America. You have a Parents' Bill of Rights now. But unfortunately, the Democrats are too extreme to believe that parents should have a say in their kids' education.
The Parents' Bill of Rights is based on 5 principles. Parents have the right to know what their children are being taught, the right to be heard, the right to see the school budget and spending, the right to protect their child's privacy, and finally, the right to keep their children safe. Democrats criticize the bill as polarizing.
President Biden has issued his first veto, and it involves a controversial investing strategy called ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance. Some large asset managers call it good business, but critics say it puts political ideals ahead of returns for investors. 2 Democratic senators, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and John Tester of Montana, criticized the president. Manchin accusing Biden of putting his administration's progressive agenda above the well-being of the American people. CBN's Jenna Browder has more.
ESG is the latest political acronym to get Washington's full attention. And after both the House and the Senate passed a bill to ban the investment strategy, President Biden signed his first veto, meaning ESG stands for now.
The only criterion should be what gives you the best math, the best return on investment.
Indiana Senator Mike Braun says that's not what you get with ESG, an investment strategy that takes into account a company's climate change initiatives, diversity, and corporate transparency, with a heavy emphasis on the climate part. Some of the largest asset managers, including BlackRock, call ESG good business. Conservatives, though, tend to disagree. Joel Griffith with the Heritage Foundation says the strategy politicizes investments, often at a cost to investors.
If you look back for the last several years and track investments in ESG type of funds versus investments in the broader stock market, you see that those ESG investments are underperforming the overall stock market.
Some investment advisors also question if ESG would actually help the climate or move the world to a more sustainable future. There are other routes to take. For Christians, one solution is faith-based investing.
Christians don't want to be controlled. They love freedom. They love biblical values. So to be told you must invest this way, you can't own fossil fuel companies, really doesn't sit well with them.
David Spica is the president and CIO at Guidestone Funds, the country's largest Christian investment management firm. He points out a few ways Guidestone promotes biblical values. One is exclusionary screens, or not owning companies inconsistent with biblical values. 2, shareholder advocacy, a way to encourage companies Guidestone owns to adopt Christ-like values. And 3, impact investing.
Impact investing, we feel like, is really the future of faith-based investing. This is where we proactively invest in companies that are doing good, that are serving the underserved, that are promoting the growth of God's kingdom.
Several states have already pulled money out of ESG investments, and at least 16 states are considering legislation to stop it.
There are a number of states that are saying, look, if you are a pension plan manager for public sector employees like firefighters and teachers and police, then you have to abide by a fiduciary duty to those clients, to the workers. And that fiduciary duty means that you cannot be considering ESG factors when it comes to making investments.
As for President Biden's veto, Congress is unlikely to be able to override it because it would require the support of 2/3 of both chambers. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
CBN News is shining a spotlight on the desecration of a Christian cemetery in Israel. And it's not an isolated incident. The disturbing trend of harassment after this.
Welcome back. Violent attacks and hateful rhetoric against Jews reached an all-time high last year in the U.S. Anti-Semitic acts jumped 36% in 2022, according to data from the Anti-Defamation League. Some 3,700 incidents were reported across the country. The year also saw a dramatic rise in white supremacist propaganda, along with an increase in harassment, vandalism, and physical assaults against Jewish people and places of worship.
The Christian church in Israel is one of the few in the Middle East experiencing growth. But a recent hate crime against a Christian cemetery has Christians and Jews alarmed.
It's part of a trend of ongoing harassment by religious extremists. As Julie Stahl reports, the Jewish community is expressing outrage at this offense and showing solidarity with Christian leaders.
Christians who live in Jerusalem's Old City say they are often harassed and even physically attacked by religious Jewish youth. Sometimes harassments and attacks are caught on security cameras, like these videos in the Armenian Quarter. This security footage posted on social media shows 2 Jewish men wearing kippahs or yarmulkes entering the cemetery where they pull over tombstones and damage graves.
It has been vandalized in an ongoing way over many years. But several days ago, the vandalism was quite severe. At least 30 tombstones were destroyed. Many of those tombstones had crosses. So this was certainly an act of bigotry or anti-Christian vandalism.
David Pileggi of Christ Church, part of the Anglican body that runs the cemetery, has seen a rise in acts against Christians over the past few years from religious extremists.
We're calling upon the state to take firm action, and not only to repair the cemetery, but at the same time toughen the laws against religious hate crimes.
In a statement, Israel's foreign ministry condemned the vandalism, saying, "This immoral act is an affront to religion, and the perpetrators should be prosecuted." The cemetery is more than 150 years old. Buried here are many generations of Protestant men and women who came from Europe and the United States to serve the people of the Holy Land.
We have buried here teachers, doctors, pastors, Bible translators. There's Horatio Spafford, who wrote It Is Well With My Soul. There's Bishop Michael Solomon Alexander, the first Jewish bishop in Jerusalem after a gap of almost 1,800 years.
Police arrested the culprits shortly after the attack. As a country, Israel welcomes Christian visitors. It's also the only country in the Middle East where the indigenous Christian population is growing instead of shrinking. So what's behind this kind of behavior?
Some of it definitely is youth. Some of it is the increasingly intolerant, we might even say aggressive culture that we're brewing here in Israel. Some of it is education. Some of it is also the results of what we might call a historical, communal, post-traumatic stress of the Jewish people.
That historical stress includes chapters like the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, and even the Holocaust. Phaedra Shapira heads the Israel Center for Jewish-Christian Relations. She says a combination of things is behind the ideology.
Some anti-Christian views can certainly be legitimated by certain religious Jewish interpretations. But I don't think we can draw any kind of straight line from Judaism to this kind of hateful behavior.
Shapira does not believe anti-Christian sentiments here are widespread.
What I heard was across the board outrage, condemnation of this hate crime, really an anti-Christian hate crime. So I want to point out that the chief rabbi of Israel, Rav David Lau, wrote, in fact, a beautiful letter of support to the Anglican Archbishop, where he very clearly and strong language condemned the behavior of these two young people.
Following this attack, dozens of Israelis organized by Tag Meir visited the cemetery to express their solidarity with the Christians and urge their government to act.
I came here today because I'm sad and ashamed to be standing in this very important historic graveyard of people who have built Jerusalem and people who have lived and loved Jerusalem. Their graves were desecrated, and this must never happen in any place in the world for any religion.
Pelegi says in addition to its history, the cemetery is still in use today and has a huge spiritual significance.
We take inspiration from the lives of these saints, their love, their self-sacrifice, their humility, their willingness to spend a lifetime here helping and bearing witness to Jesus, the Messiah.
Shapiro believes the solution starts with better education in the home and from rabbis and religious teachers who need to speak clearly against it. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Mount Zion Protestant Cemetery, Jerusalem.
Julie, thanks. Well, it's the first week of spring, and you know what that means if you're in Washington. The cherry blossoms are here. Coming up, catch peak bloom while you can.
Finally, tonight, D.C.'s cherry blossoms are now at peak bloom, coinciding perfectly with the first week of spring.
This is the story I am dressed for. According to the National Park Service, the trees are considered full bloom when 70% of the blossoms are open. The cherry blossoms along the tidal basin were given as a gift from the mayor of Tokyo more than 100 years ago. And if you're planning to go take a look for yourself, plan ahead. Please have mercy on Caitlin and I who live around here. They attract over 1 million visitors to the Washington, D.C. area every year, and I notice every single one of them every year the cherry blossoms come out. Peak bloom from cherry blossoms typically occurs between late March and early April, so they are right on time right now. You're going to go check them out?
Yeah, I think we are both planning to check them out this weekend, so assuming the rain clears, you can catch us there.
That's right, that's right. Peak blooming. All right, that'll do it for us tonight on Faith Nation.
We'll see you next week.